While Bob is getting Kevin squared away here, I'm just going to introduce Kevin. One thing that you guys will really like about Kevin, you like him anyway, he's a good guy, is he's a second-generation one-namer. Now, how many second-generation one-namers do we have? But Kevin's mother, Beryl, has worked on the Peapell family for 25 years, and there's probably people in this audience who know Kevin's mother and her work there. So Kevin's carrying that on. But the other neat thing about Kevin is he's been with the Environment Agency since, like, I don't know, the dinosaurs or something. 40 years? Or 40 years are its predecessors. Well, I joined the Environment Agency about 11, 12 years ago, and do you know, Kevin and I worked together for almost a decade before we had any idea that both were interested in family history, and let alone that we were both doing one-name studies. So I thought of Kevin quite quickly when we were talking about this, and given that he's a strategy analyst by trade, he's going to talk to you about analysis today. So can we give a warm welcome to Kevin Hurley?
Thank you for the introduction, Kim, and thank you for staying to listen to me. Okay, we'll use the mouse. Okay, we're going to start off with a little bit about what I'm going to cover, starting off with your data, then I'll get to the analysis bit, and including using your analysis. And it will build on some of the things that have been talked about so far today. So, as Kim said, I took over a one-name study after my mother, Beryl Hurley, passed away. So I had a ready-made set of data, albeit on paper. So I don't have to do the data collection. So I'm right in to the analysis. In fact, that was my first family history, was actually doing taking over a one-name study. Okay, this is going to be about what in terms of analysis, not how. So I'm not going to talk about you go away and this is how you do the analysis. This is what you this is the tools you use, that sort of thing. I might mention them on the way. I'm certainly not going to show you how to use them, so you'll be glad about that. Much of the data relates to the people study. So I've been able to say I'm looking for people, so everyone who asks me what I'm doing. But the techniques are universal, even though much of the data will be in the UK. Okay, lots of this is based upon the 7 pillars of wisdom. And it's a good starting point to look at the way we can analyse and present data. So there's a section on analysis in there, and it talks about a number of things: data completion, using maps, statistics, but I'm not going to go into details of statistics, lineage numbers, and DNA projects. I will be covering the first 4 to a certain extent. I'm not going to talk about DNA. That's been the topic of lots of other things. You'll be glad about that. There's one other area that I think is quite profitable for analysis, around pictures and videos and audio and those sorts of things. I'm not going to cover that either. Okay, so I'm going to start off with turning data into information and knowledge. I can't go as far as wisdom, I'm afraid. But there are really 3 bits, sort of Helen's already said. There's the data collection, data analysis, and synthesis. And as far as I'm concerned, you can go round those. You don't have to complete your data your data collection before you start your analysis. You don't have to complete the analysis before you start synthesis. And both of those may lead to want to collect more data. Okay, enough of this preamble. So we'll move on to what you want to do and why, as being one of the key things. You really need to understand what it is you want to do. You've got to have the right data in the right form to do your analysis. If it's in the wrong form, you're going to have problems with it, and I will talk a bit about the quality and consistency. And all this before I get into the analysis itself. So, what do you want to do and why? We will just touch on that briefly. There's lots of questions that you may want to answer. Sorry, I've gone too fast. But anyway, let's go back. There's lots of questions you may want to answer, like, have you got the core information? Have you got other data? How good is that data that you want to test out? Can you link individuals together? There's things like portal couples you might want to look at. And you may get onto some of the stuff around context that has been talked about and combining your data with other information. Other studies, as Helen said, historical information as we've had already, census information. I've categorised that into some areas, such as knowing things about your data and analysing them, things about individuals, things about families and groups, then the social context, and then combining it with other data. So it's just to say that those are my threads, if you like, for this this discussion. Okay. Three things here. Having the right data in the right form is really important for analysis. If you capture the data, say, as just text fields, you're going to have a real problem analysing it. It's not impossible, but it's difficult. So make sure you're capturing the facts that you want to do your analysis later on in the right way. And I've had to go, I had to say, though I had the data, I had to go back once or twice to get the data into the right form. Now I think I understand much more about that. All or enough. You certainly don't need to have all of your data before you can start doing your analysis on that. And finally, one of the things that I say is know your facts before you start to twist them. And that really means understanding the data before you start making use of it. So what does knowing your facts mean? Well, some things around quality and consistency. Why was the data originally collected? Does it make sense to use it for what you want to? For example, can you use census information to study social mobility? With caution, possibly. Is there any bias that's in that data that you need to be aware of? Where there certain types of people missed out? Is location accurate enough? If you're doing, if you're mapping, I've got some people, I do mean people, who are born, according to my data, in the centre of countries or counties. But actually that's because I don't know, other than the fact they were born in Wiltshire. Can I use that? Well, dates. Dates can be problematic. Who's provided the information? Did they know the date was accurate? Did they guess? Did they lie? And can you link that data to what you want to analyse? To an individual, maybe to occupations, to name spellings, and I'll come on to that a bit later on. Those sorts of things. And also I'd say about having standards and sticking to them. So developing a set of standards for yourself and then staying with those is probably more important than having, lots of detailed standards, but having a few that you can stick to. Okay, that is as much as I wanted to say about the data. I'll move on to going to talk about simple analysis to start off with. Then I'll move on to some of the other topics: location and migration, age, mortality and marriage, occupations, and then name changes over time. Actually, I won't quite start with simple analysis. At the start, I put up this picture to show what I was going to talk about. That's a form of a mind map, which I use quite a lot to work out what I'm going to do. I produced a mind map at the start of this, when I started putting this talk together. And you can see the main structure on there. And it's a way of analysing what you want to do. You can use them to link your thoughts together and ideas in a sort of structured, semi-structured way, if you like. And you can actually move them around. And I use these a lot, not only to work out what I want to do, but to understand things, to take notes at meetings, and so on. And that was my final mind map. The stuff in red was not finished a week or so ago, and actually, as I was doing this, it was spawning me with things thinking, actually, I ought to know that. I ought to go away and do a bit more on this. So you can't read that. I'm not expecting you to, just as well. But this is in a tool called MindJet Manager. Now, you can do these by hand. There was an article in June's which Kim Baldacchino did, and that is from the June's article. It was about a William S. Lake wheel, and you can expand those little circles on there to get more information underneath. And that's using a free tool called FreeMind, which I've also used. I've also done them for when I wanted to publish my study, and that was in PowerPoint. And you can do mind maps by hand, but it's just a good tool for starting out with your analysis, working out what you want to do. Okay. How big is your study? Well, we all know about the study size based on the 1881 census. There it is. So, and there's other methods. There's the small shore and the Barnwell methods. What I'm going to do is to take a look at, for my Peapell study, from 1841 to 1951 census. So this is a graph of the people recorded in the census with numbers at the bottom. I don't know how many of you have done this sort of thing, but it's showing all of the census dates on the bottom and the numbers at the side. So it's a small study. There's problems with this, not least spelling. As I'll come on to later, Peapell spelling didn't fully stabilise until fairly late on in that period. And there's a number of Peapell families that seem to be missing. So I can add that on some of the other variants. So that is PEA, PELL, the normal spelling of Peapell if you come from Wiltshire. That is Peapell with one L. But there was a lot of that spelling before the censuses. So it's not a registered variant, but it is one where I've got a lot early on. And the colours here, they're in colours, but they're different shapes for people who can't see the colours particularly well. So the green ones, I think, have come up with a triangle there. And I can carry on adding the different Peapell registered variants to that. So you can see that they all increased over that period. And if we look at 1881, we've got 287 altogether, so it's still a small study, all the variants. But that is the individual numbers of the variants. I could show that stacking the numbers up to be additive. So here we are. I've used solid colours now with the names along the sides, and you can see it gives a good idea of the total Peapell population rising from a relatively small number at the start to over 400 in 1911. And you can extrapolate that onwards, as people have done, from telephone directories and so on. So that's great. That's one way of looking at the Peapell name. I could use the same information to show the percentages of people using those names. So that is 100%, obviously a small number in 1841, a larger number in 1911. And you can see there's percentages there. And you can look at trends in the numbers of people with each of those names there. So Peapell, PEA, PELL was small in 1841, has increased, it's got increased in 1851 and sort of stayed at that sort of level a bit bigger. Some of the others reduced as a percentage of the overall numbers. And you can show that information in a number of different ways. So there's other ways of doing it, including you don't have to have colours, you can use it as grayscale, or you could indeed use hatching and so on. Okay, so that's just different ways of displaying that information. And some of you will like some of those, and others will like different ones, I'm sure. I'm going to look at how many individuals are linked to trees. So when I took over the Peapell One Name study, there was lots of information on paper. There was a few in typed out Word documents or whatever, but most of the information wasn't held electronically. And there were lots of trees, some of which, for Peapell, I had most of the trees already ready for me. For some of the variants, there was less information, perhaps fragmented information. So I wanted to get the information into electronic format that I could manipulate so I could analyse it. So I used MS Excel, as I knew it already, and it gives me good analytical tools. So I got the core data into MS Excel with some difficulty, I suppose. I don't like doing that sort of data entry sort of thing. And then I wanted to be able to make sure I was linking it together. So I used Roots Magic, but it could have been any family tree software, that doesn't really matter. But what I wanted to do was to track that I was actually managing to link the data together properly. So what I did was on the front end of my Excel spreadsheet, I put some graphs. So the first one was just telling me, as I was linking data within Excel to family trees, it would register. Behind it was a bit complicated how it did it, because it can be, but that was just saying that I had, for 1841, 100% of my Peapell, that name linked. There was one family that was actually spelled Peapell, but it was a different variant, so that wasn't linked at the start. And I had one or two that were spelled Peapell, but were actually deviants of some of the name that wasn't in the study at all. And I wondered how to deal with those. Now, more recently, I was looking at PEOPLES, and that's one family that was added. So that I knew I had one family. The name was dying out in that family, so they disappeared by the 1891 census. Or she disappeared by then. I then found another family that came from a place in Upton in Worcestershire, which was actually related, definitely part of the same family as the Peapells, and I added that in, and instantly that moved the numbers that I had linked together up. Now, that was making me feel good because I could see how many people I'd linked together. A good visual way of actually encouraging me to put the data in. Okay, so that's about linking, so knowing how many people I'd linked at any one time. I've got other graphs that did the rest of that one. I'm not going to bore you with all of those, but it's just showing you how you can use that information. I'll go on to lineage numbers. There's the Chandler approach that was set out for calculating numbers of individuals historically, and that's in the 7 Pillars of Wisdom. It's based upon an occupational surname, makes assumptions, but it's actually quite good for working out historically how many families there might have been at various dates in the past. And it's fairly easy to do. So that's one of the reasons I did that. I don't want to do anything that's going to be hard work if I can avoid it. So you can see the populations at various times. This information is slightly different from what's in the other one. So it's off Wikipedia, and the information has been updated by people. So, but populations, and I've chosen 1541, which is very close to the first Peapell record that I've got, which is in 1554, second year of Queen Mary's reign, I think. No doubt someone will tell me if I've got that wrong. And 1350, because that's fairly close to the poll tax records, and Carolyn Fenwick has produced a book of 3 volumes with poll tax records in. So, for Peapell, people, I've got the numbers in the census. And from that you can work out how many people there were likely to be living in 1541 and 1350. It works better with more numbers, and there may be all sorts of reasons why it's wrong that I'll come on to later on, but it gives you an idea that we had maybe 4 to 8 people in 1541 and 3 to 7 in 1350. You can do the same with the variants, as I've done there. You can also do the same for households, how many households we had. So, Peapell households, there were 8 in 1851. 17 in 1881, and we've probably, if you look at the likelihood, probably 1 to 2 in 1541, and the same in 1350. So I'm not looking for huge numbers of lines back at that time, and that's quite a useful sort of thing to know anyway. And similarly with the rest of the study, we're talking about a relatively small number, 4 to 6. I have to say I've not found any of the rest of the study. I've only found one for the Peapell spelling. Obviously you could do DNA. I haven't. So that was what I have done though is to look at the poll taxes for 1377 and so on. I've only looked in the volume for Wiltshire, volume 3. It takes a long time to go through, and quite a number of days it took me to go through that, I have to say. Goodness knows how long it took her to put it together. I didn't find any records. There are many assumptions about that calculation, and part of knowing your data is understanding that, first of all, people may not be typical. For all sorts of reasons, there may, maybe the name has changed. The surname may have arisen or changed after 1381. Inward migration, certainly for some of the people variants, is. I know that some of them came from Ireland now, which I didn't know when I started off doing this. So that may be another reason to inward migration. Okay, I've covered simple analysis. I'm going to talk a little bit about locational migration. A lot of this I'm going to be going through quite fast. It's more to give you ideas to think about other things. But I will just start off with a little bit of background here. Everyone's familiar with the Archer Surname Atlas, I hope. So what I'm going to do is just put up very quickly, this is the people in 1881, centred around Wiltshire. This is Peapell spelling. Again, you can see it centred around the Wiltshire, Hampshire, but also some up in the Liverpool area. And similarly for Peapell spelling. Peapell. Slightly different, and then Peaples, and I think that's probably got 2 derivations, and that reflects probably the distribution there. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background, and possibly some people are less familiar with Public Profiler. That's for more current information. It's available for 26 countries, but it is restricted to telephone and electoral register data. So you can take a look at what there is. It's got great limitations. Now, I don't know whether you can see that, because I can't see it on here. It shows you've got a high frequency in New Zealand of the Peapell name, which is the main one. Middling in the UK and low in Canada. It also tells us the top cities. So it says here the top city with this name is Swindon. And that's one of the main areas where the name originated. We can also look at UK. This is the distribution from electoral registers and telephone directories. And you can look at New Zealand, and you can see it's in North Island in the distribution around census population there. And we can also look at a different spelling, Peapell, and you can see for the UK what the distribution is now. And side by side you can put up Peapell. So what I'm doing here is start comparing the different names. You can see a different spread around the country. Sorry. Okay, something slightly different. I was, as part of the study, but also part of my family, I was trying to find a female Richards who said she came from Newport in Wales. Said she was born around 1865. Got photographs of her and her mother. So he knew it at date range. She had a cousin called Richards, born in Cardiff, lived in Bristol. Grandparents came from Devon. So just trying to understand a bit more about her, and when she, knew that I couldn't find her in any of the records, and I tried reconstituting all of the Richards families in Newport from 1841 through to 1891 when she got married. So here is a table setting out three things. You've got the Newport population from 1841 to 1891, and you can see it's increasing. We've got Richards in Newport, so that's the number of Richards in the censuses in Newport over that time period, also increasing. And the number of Richards females who were born between 1859 and 1870. So in 1861 there was a small number of them, and so on. And then in 1891 they started to get married. So I wanted to look at that and understand it a bit better. I decided to produce a graph again. So this has got, on the left-hand side, the population in Newport, and it shows it went from about 20,000-ish, that's the blue line, the top line, up to about 96,000, so nearly increasing by a factor of 4. But the Richards in Newport only doubled over that same period, and you can see that very clearly because we've got two axes to this graph. We've got Richards on the right-hand side and the Newport population on the left-hand side. So that's one thing that you can do, is just compare things together for that information. Another way of showing some of this information, Newport was a growing town at that time. So in 1841 it had a population of 23,000, which we could represent as 2 and a bit houses. And you may have seen this approach used. 1851 had a population that can represent by 4 and a bit houses. In 1861 the population reduced, and that was probably because of the registration districts, census district, enumeration districts rather. And then it went on growing up to 1891, and we can represent that there. So that's just one way that you can present that data. The Richards were also growing. So in 1841 there was 382 of them, and they went on growing. You can see the dip, and they went on growing right the way through until 1891. So I'm looking at Richards girls born between 1859 and probably 1870. That's the period. So in 1861, they'd been no more than 3 years old. So they'd be bouncing babies, so we'll bring those in. There are 12 of them. Then in 1871, there were 82 of them. 1881, there were 88. And 1891, they'd start to get married, so there were less of them. So just a different way of displaying that data. But where do the Richards families come from? Because, so what I've got here is a table that very clearly shows you where they came from, doesn't it? Okay. So, we've seen before, you can use something like GenMap to look at where they came from. Dots on there represent small dots 1 to 4 people, larger dot up to 8 people. And it shows most of the Richards came from within the area around Newport or within Wales. There were a few that came from other places. It'd be very interesting to contrast this with the total Newport population, and I've not done that, but I think it's because the Richards were probably been diluted by other incomers from the rest of the country at that time. If you don't have GenMap, you can display this still. This is just cutting and pasting, with putting in a map of the counties and just putting in PowerPoint a circle for the number in each county. Same information, those arrows helps to show where they came from. Different way of displaying the same information. I'm not going to do a lot on mapping, it will come a little bit. Gerald Cook did a really good session, I think it was October last year, on mapping. And that's one of the slides he showed for migration going out. I'm not going to cover that in detail. He used Family Atlas, and that will take GEDCOM files. But what I did do was to look at, again, the Peapell family. So this is John Peapell, or Peapell of Hannington, which is right in the north of Wiltshire. A little village there, hardly a village. It starts off in the 17th century, and look at the Peapell descendants of him. So this is just going to be one thing that you can do, which is to look over time. I'm going to go to world view, and I've had to make the dots a bit bigger. So that is representing the people in 1650, no, that's 1700 for a 50-year period, records. And we can move on to 1750, not much change, starts to increase, and then by 1900 we're seeing some people in Australia and New Zealand, and then into Canada. And that's the sort of thing that very visually will show you over a period of time what's happening with your information. And that's just a slider so we can move along at the bottom of the screen. Obviously I've done screenshots rather than showing. Okay, I'll move on now to age, marriage and mortality. Okay, so I've got a table here of marriages for all of my variant names, summarised by county in 20-year, 5-year blocks. So to make it worthwhile, I was pulling out a lot of information there. I wanted to compare Peapell, which was the original name, P-E-A-P-E-L-L, with the P-E-O-P-L-E-S, because I felt they probably had two different origins, that name. I thought they might be different. So I wanted to compare 1850 with 1950, so 100 years apart and two names. So that's the ones on that block that I wanted to compare, and that's the data in more detail. So it's easy to see the differences between them, isn't it? Okay, well, not really. What I have done, though, for these is to pull out the Peapell marriages. Again, this is not using any particular software. All I've done is I've cut and pasted this, and I've stacked up the marriages so you can see that we've got two centres, really, one around Wiltshire, the other around London, and a bit of spread over a 100-year period. They had started to move away from Wiltshire and London by 1950. And this is, something that you can do very simply. You don't need much in the way of software. I think I did this with PowerPoint and just stacking blocks together some time ago. I could do the same thing for the P-E-O-P-L-E-S. It could have been done for births, it could have been done for deaths. In fact, I've got them, but I don't want to bore you with lots of these. So I want to pick out some different things. This is the Peapell marriages, P-E-O-P-L-E-S marriages in 1850, and they were centred around Liverpool and London, and not very many of them. And by 1950, there was a lot more on the right-hand side. And we could equally compare Peapell with Peapell in 1850. Two different colours there, representing P-A-P-L-L and P-O-P-L-E-S, or similarly in 1950. I'm not going to pull out any conclusions from this, it's just to show you the sorts of things that you can do. Okay, again, this is births by decade of Peapell and variants. There's a lot of data there again. This has been extracted from birth data using a simple pivot table from Excel. And I had to add a column to calculate the decade, because I wanted to do it by decade. So I've got there just total number of births, and you can see in total 1,060 births. A similar table for deaths, and you can see that if you look at the bottom right corner of the two, the totals are there's 160 births and 580 deaths, so a lot more births than deaths, as you might expect. And you can combine those together, and you can start to look at which decades there were more births than deaths, and which decades there were more deaths than births. So and you could do the same thing for baptisms and burials for earlier data. Okay. Average age at death. So this is from the GRO index, starting when the death data is readily available. And you can see a table there of, again, all of them, all variants. And you could graph this in a number of ways. That's one where there's a lot of detail there. Again, I'm not going into the detail to talk about it, but it's quite interesting that in the decade 1900s, there was a drop in the average age of death. And that's something I need to find out a bit more about, why that happened at that time. And I could graph that information as a 3D graph, so I can change that. That's not sure that really helps, but there are other ways of showing that same information, and it's really what helps you to pull out the information in the best way. You can use pie charts. Display data, and this is marriages in my study, so this is just the total numbers of marriages and a pie representing the total numbers for each of the variants. So, for example, the green is PEO, PLE, and there's 129 marriages there. What I was doing with this was to look at the number of people who married. So 42% of the people I've got married, and of those that married, 7% married more than once. So one of the things I wanted to do was to understand whether that was typical or not. Now I know there's lots of information available, and I've been pointing to even more sources, so that's great. But what I did do was to look at some of the information that's available in the Office of National Statistics. And that's a graph that's available. And that tells you where one or more partners said they were married or been married previously. And you can see from that it sort of starts off around 15, probably 18, 19%, drops off a bit, increases during the war periods, and then there's a big rise at the end. So there's some differences. Now, was I looking at different populations? Have I got some marriages missing? Have I not linked my marriages together properly? Raising questions, but that's good, I think, because it's now go back and having a look at the information. Incidentally, there was no difference between people, males and females. Okay. The next one's not really analysis, but it is fun. This is a Wordle. You've probably seen these on the web. This is all of the spouses of people. And they're just put into the Wordle. There's more Smith spouses, so they're bigger. And it's one way that you can visually display all of the spouses. A little bit on occupations. This is a map of the Wiltshire, Hampshire, Gloucester, Oxford, Berkshire borders, which is where a lot of the activity takes place. So I think my mother, when she was collecting the data, must have been to an awful lot of different places to get the data. Okay, I'm going to talk about portal couples or bottleneck couples. I've got 3 contenders in this area. I have got 1854, John Peapell and Ellen Campnell in Latton in Wiltshire. I've got John Peapell and Alice Batson in Hannington. I've mentioned Hannington already. And I've got John Peapell and Sarah Piddler in Burnham Dean in Hampshire. Okay. If I look at this line of John and Alice from Hannington, this is a simple tree with lots of things taken out. So it's just a tree of the names that go through from 1600 through to about 1900. And those names are the earliest recorded names, so they'll tend to be baptism or birth names. That's what I tend to use for the individuals. But I could show this tree as a tree of occupations. So there you can see straight occupations as a tree. And you can immediately see that they're probably mostly a line of minor tradesmen. And one of the things I was wondering about is how does that relate to other families, other variants? So if I was to go back to the John Peapell and Ellen Campnell line, I wanted to compare the two. So we've got, if I put the Hannington line, it's only the top bit I'm really interested in, and here I've put more, I've put the names as well, because the spellings on this one is quite important. You can see that they were, as I said, minor tradesmen, if I can use that term. And if we bring in the other, a few of the siblings that I know their occupations for, there are a few more that I don't, so I've left those out. But again, you can see tradesmen again, by and large. If I bring in then the other family that's in the next parish but one, so they're very close to each other, are they related? And you look at the occupations there, they're not quite the same. They're certainly not wildly different. I suppose you could say tradesmen again. There is an interesting difference here that the name actually changed. The spelling of the name changed from P-O-P-A-L-L to P-P-W-A-L-L. Peapell. Must be something to do with the Wiltshire accent. I need to follow that and find out more. It also changed when Jane Peapell's husband was the, on the top there, was the vicar of the parish. So it looks like it was a real change in spelling. Okay, so it compares occupations. And I could do the same for John Peapell and Sarah Piddler, as the other couple. This time I'm just going to push those them up and add a few more on the bottom, so that we can compare the Vernon Dean people. Difficult, I can't make any conclusions from it, but it's something that you can do quite easily, is just look at occupations. Okay, let's go back to the, I wanted to look at social mobility. Okay, sorry, I went too fast then. I want to look at social mobility, and I was looking at the census information, and the 1871 and 1881 census are probably the best in terms of classifications to use, but they're not, obviously not consistent over the whole period. But some of the things around trying to classify people on the basis of census information is that you get a professional class in those censuses that includes private soldiers, and it's very difficult, and postmen and things like that. And equally, you've got this agricultural class that goes everything from a ag-lab through to a vet and other things. So it's quite difficult if you're looking at social mobility. So in the end, I decided not to do that. I just settled on 3 classifications: agricultural workers, unskilled workers and labourers, and skilled. And so that's another 3D graph that shows those 3 groupings. But although it's quite nice for presentational purposes, it's difficult to get any information out of it. So looking at a line graph, you can see there immediately some useful information starting to come out of it. But if you add in side by side with that line graph the same information done as percentages, you can see the significant drop in agricultural labourers from 1841 through to 1911, from over 50% were ag-labs through to virtually none in 1911. And you can see that increase in skilled and unskilled labourers. So just different way, putting stuff side by side that different formats can give you different information. Okay. Name change over time. John Peapell through to Peapell there. I've looked at spellings, and there are lots of spellings through the census and through early censuses. There are a lot, and then you go back in the records, they seem to increase the number of spellings. If I want to look at when the name Peapell settled down, P-A-P-L, I can produce a graph like this of the percentage of those spellings that are P-A-P-E-L-L. So I can see that in 1812 they settled down. From 1812 they started to settle down. Maybe a little bit before that. I can compare another line, which ended up as P-E-A-P-L-E. and you can see that they actually settle down much later. So you can quite graphically start to show when spellings of variants settle down. And putting those side by side, you can clearly see there that the P-E-A-P-E-L spelling settled down a lot earlier than the P-E-A-P-L-E spelling. And we can add in the other spellings to that. Okay. All I wanted to say about using your analysis, I've actually included it on along. It's been quite a sort of a lot to cover in that time. This is a Wordle that I thought I'd show you. You might recognise some of the names on here. This is the names that everyone attending today are studying. Well, just let's be clear about the data. It's every name that people who are attending said they were studying, and there's only 2 per person at most, usually 1. So if it looks like there's more, I've cut those out. That got transcribed accurately onto a spreadsheet 2 weeks ago. Just be clear about your data. Okay, any questions? If you haven't got any, I've got some Wordles of spouses from various people that will go on in the background, such as farmer and so on.
Very nice. Thank you, Kevin.
Kevin, you mentioned early on about the importance of making sure you've got the data in the right form. You didn't elaborate too much. You implied that you couldn't have it all in text.
Yeah.
But you didn't exactly explain an example, let's put it that way. I think I know what it is, but I'm not sure.
Okay. At the moment, probably the best way to do it is to capture all the data that you're interested in analysing on as separate information. So that's either separate fields or whatever you like. So if you're interested in spellings, that means you need to capture every instance of the spelling separately. If you're interested in occupations, every time an occupation comes up, you need to capture that, because that will start to tell you about maybe the frequency of the occupation versus others. So I've got someone who was a carpenter, then they were a village constable for many, many years. I don't understand why anyone would want to be a village constable for 20 years, and a Baptist preacher at the same time. I don't know the two went together, but you need to capture it, so you can start to work out what the relative frequency of usage of those is.
Because I thought you were going to say a little bit more about the difference between text and numerics. You want actually looking at that. It was really the type of data.
Yes, that's right. I mean, there are some people who tend to capture people as, just as notes, and then trying to extract the fact that you've got occupations from that can be quite difficult. You really need to have it fairly well structured. Techniques in 5 to 10 years' time will change, and some of the tools that are coming along will be much better at pulling that data out from those sorts of that sort of way. But at the moment, most of our techniques aren't really good enough for analysing that sort of information.
Any others? How about then, let's give a round of thanks to Kevin.